Hi everyone, it's Laura here, and in today's video I'm going to share with you a fall-themed card with the Winds Are Blowing stamp set by LDRS Creative. This is the stamp set that I'll be using today, and I think it's absolutely gorgeous. I have shared a card with a similar stamp set, but that is summer themed and also by LDRS Creative last month here on my YouTube channel. I will link to it in the description box down below, and also there are several other stamp sets with this theme and this style, and I will link the winter and spring themed ones also in the description box down below. But coming to today's card, I decided to do some masked stamping. So the first thing I did is to create some masks on masking paper. I stamped the images that I wanted to use and I fussy cut them with my scissors. Masking paper is basically a low-tack sticky paper that you can adhere to your worksheet so that you can do techniques like masked stamping and ink blending. And right now I'm using the masks also to create an arrangement on my panel. The paper that I'm using is alcohol marker friendly, and the die that I used to die cut this panel is the LDRS Creative Scalloped Rectangle Frame Set. When you do masked stamping, what you stamp first will be on the foreground and what you stamp last will be on the background, so it will be the furthest element in the back. So I want this pumpkin to be the element which is closest to us. I stamped it first and then I used the mask to protect it. I'm also using the largest mask with this beautiful girl to figure out the positioning of the other two stamps, and then I'm going ahead and I'm going to stamp them on my paper. The fact that I masked the pumpkin that I stamped first makes it so that I am not going to stamp over those areas now with this pumpkin spice latte cup and the second pumpkin, and I will be repeating this step again to stamp the girl, which will be behind this little composition. And the ink that I'm using is the LDRS Creative Hybrid ink in the color Iced Tea. This is part of a pack of 4. These are mini ink cubes and you have 2 browns, a gray and a black. So this is pretty nice if you want to have a small set of neutral colors for your stamping. I find that, using something that's different from the traditional black works really nice for certain types of mood. In this case, I wanted a fall-themed card, so I went for this warm, lighter brown, and I think it worked really nicely. Once I was done stamping, I decided to do some ink blending on my background, and I used a couple of colors of blue to create a kind of a faded background behind the girl. I was trying to first achieve a smooth blend, but I actually went in a little bit too hard with my blending brush, so I got a few paint strokes, and I decided to just embrace the look and actually create a background that, whose characteristic was these paint strokes. So I basically ended up with some paintbrush strokes, but instead of ditching the whole thing or trying to fix it, I decided to embrace the look. So for the rest of the blending, I was a little bit heavy-handed and I made these paintbrush strokes sort of a feature of my background. I added some shimmery splatters using a paintbrush and some mica powders, and then I also decided to add a few water droplets. Don't be too heavy on the water on this paper because this is not watercolor paper, so it will start peeling and acting a little bit weird if you add too much water, but a quick spritz with your spray bottle is enough to get some, texture on your background without ruining the paper. At this point, I could actually go ahead and start coloring the image, which is a process I really enjoyed, I have to say. I started from the face of this beautiful girl and I went in with my lightest color, which is my FS9 marker, and I used that to map the shadow areas. When it comes to shading realistic faces, you really have to think about which parts of the face is protruding and which one is more recessed. So it kind of helps to even just touch your face and figure out which parts are more forward and which parts, as I said, are receding. The ones that are receding will be the ones in shadow. So these include the eye sockets, the areas around the bridge of the nose, just right under the nose, and on the chin, just under your lips. You will have a shadow around her face because the cheeks curve backward, and also there will be some shadows under the hair, and these are shadows that are cast by the hair. The cheekbones, the tip of the nose, and the forehead where the eyebrows are will be the parts that are in light, so this will be filled in with our lightest color. And as you see on screen, I am listing the markers that I used to create the shadows and the highlights on this face. I decided to darken up the shadows a little bit more, and if you are unsure, as I was in this case, because this is the second time I color a face which is a little bit more realistic compared to the more cutesy characters that you see featured on this channel, it really helps to build your depth gradually. So start by mapping your shadows with your lightest marker and then start adding darker and darker colors to those areas, and finally blend them out towards the highlight using the lightest marker. I hope this is clear enough. This is basically the process that I'm doing right now. I filled in almost all the face with my mid-tone color, and now I am coming in with my highlight markers to fill in the highlights and blend everything together. The neck will be darker because it's more in shadow compared to the face, so there I basically don't have my highlight marker, but just my darker shadows and the mid-tone marker. I wasn't entirely sure about the color palette that I wanted for this image, so the safest thing was to go in and color the elements whose color were kind of fixed. So I knew for sure that the pumpkins were going to be orange and that the leaves were going to be green and brown. So I started from those elements, and that sort of gave me a visual guide of the color palette that I was kind of achieving as I was going forward with the coloring process, and that helped me pick out some colors for her hair, her outfit, and her eyes too. Also, when you have an image like this with a focal point and some accompanying images, it's helpful and it makes your life easier to spend more time and to add more detail to your focal image. In this case, it's the girl, and to have some less detailed coloring on the rest of the images. This, well, it obviously saves time, but also draws the attention a little bit more strongly towards the focal image, which is actually the main part of the composition in this case. So it's kind of a win-win. I colored in one of the leaves on her hair green, and for the other one I went for some oranges and some warm browns. I'm trying to add back in some of the detail that was lost with the coloring using a dark brown marker, and then I'm going to blend everything out towards the outer areas of the leaf that I colored with a burnt orange marker. So at this point it was a little bit easier to choose the markers that I wanted to use on her hair, and I started again by adding some color using my lighter marker, and I'm going to work my way towards the darker ones and then back towards the light. I'm creating texture using some flicking motions. I'm starting the flicks from where her hair parts in the middle of her forehead and where the fringe or, these strands of hair sort of tuck behind her face. I'm also leaving some white highlights between these two areas because this will make the hair look shiny. And I went a little bit darker than I thought I was going to go for my shadows because this contrast make her hair really look shiny. To make the hair look realistic, make sure you follow the curve of the hair, which usually is kind of outlined by the lines in the illustration when adding your flicks, and this way you will also give an appearance of volume on the hair. The last part of the coloring, or almost the last part of the coloring, was her outfit, and I started by laying down some pink markers, again first mapping the shadows with my lighter marker and then darkening them until I got the depth that I wanted. I blended everything out towards the highlight, and then I decided that I wanted this color to be a little closer to what I had already. I'm quickly using some dusty pinks for the band of the hat, but basically because alcohol markers are transparent, you can layer them to create shades that are in between what you have. So I went in with those burnt oranges that I used on the pumpkins to kind of create almost an underpainting, if you're familiar with the term, and then I went back on top of everything again with the pink markers. I did the same with the purples on the band on her hat, and I'm going to repeat the same steps for her scarf. This time I skipped the part where I first laid down the pink markers, and I went directly with a first layer of oranges and then a second layer with my pinks. For the oranges, I used two colors, one for the shadows and one for the midtones and the highlights, so that I already start adding depth to those parts at the stage of the underpainting. I used a red marker to color her lips, and then I added some shadows with a purple marker. I really love this touch of color on her face. I didn't add any makeup besides this, but I think this makes her lips and her face in the end really pop. For her eyes, I used some muted blues. I added some shadows. I'm using two markers for them. And then I decided to bring out her facial features a little bit more using a brown marker, with which I basically went over all the lines around her eyes, her eyebrows, and later on also her nose. And I have to tell you, I really enjoyed coloring this image. I think the illustration itself, it's gorgeous, and it was a great challenge to go ahead and try again my hand at coloring a more realistic face. I really want to do this more often, and I really have to get my hands on the last two sets in this series from LDRS Creative. They're really gorgeous. And let me know if you would like to see me coloring more of these images too. So I'll make sure to grab those stamp sets and get coloring again. The last bit of the coloring, which wasn't shown because it was just very simple, was to add some green to the label on the pumpkin spice latte cup. And then I started working on the background of my card. I blended the LDRS Creative Hybrid ink in the color Iced Tea over an A2 sized panel of white cardstock, and then I used the leaf in the set to create a random pattern with a tone-on-tone stamping, again using the same Iced Tea ink. I'm adding some quick strokes to the edges of this panel using a bronze Jelly Roll pen. This will add a very subtle detail that will basically become visible once you move the card into the light, and will sort of bring some more light to the background to tie it in with those shiny splatters we created on our focal panel. I stamped the sentiment from the same Winds Are Blowing stamp set using, again, hybrid ink in the color Iced Tea by LDRS Creative. I'm using my Mini Misty and I'm stamping repeatedly until I get a nice coverage over those inks that I have in the background. And then, because I felt that the image wasn't standing out enough against the background, I decided to outline her with some markers that were matching in tone the color of the background, but that were a little bit darker. I used a couple of different markers and then I blended everything out with my colorless blender. And then, as a finishing step, I adhered my card front to a top folding A2 card base cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches and scored at 4.25 inches, and that finished off my card. And that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I inspired you to create with the beautiful Winds Are Blowing stamp set by LDRS Creative. You can find a list of all the supplies I used in the description box down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by, and have a great day.